right here on 106.5 FM. And we're very grateful you're joining us today. For a Green Future is a show about environmental issues, ecological issues. We talk about the things that you need to know to protect yourself, to protect your family, to protect future generations, the things that maybe aren't covered in the regular media. And it's a very special For a Green Future today because we are talking with the first snowfall of the year. Just happened, the first serious snowfall of this winter. And it was a bit of a challenge driving in. I could tell you there were parts of the roads that were quite icy. We really had took a lot longer to get in than usual. But, you know, I'm originally from Western New York, originally from the Buffalo area. So for us, this is kind of mild. You know, it's not that harsh. But one thing I wanted to talk about as I was coming in on this snowy, cold day is one snowfall does not a winter make. And what I mean is that humans have a tendency to remember the things that support their positions and to ignore or forget things that don't support what they already believe. So some people now, here we are, January 13th, are going to point to this snowfall and say, ha, global warming. We don't have any global warming. Look, there's snow. Well, you know, the fact that there's snow today doesn't change the fact that we've gone all the way up till January, to the middle of January, without any kind of serious winter happening. That's why, you know, our positions and what we think about and what we believe are influenced by our emotions. And so that's why it's so important, if you're looking at a question like, is there really global warming, that you don't just rely on your own memories, because those memories are going to be distorted in order to support the positions that you already have. And one of the best examples of this are people who are addicted gamblers. I've known a few addicted gamblers in my day, and if you ask them, they always win. They'll talk about, you know, going to the casino and, you know, I hit a jackpot, or, you know, I bet on the horses and I hit the trifecta. And yeah, they did. And yes, they won at those times. But if you add up everything over the whole course of their career, you'll find that they lost money because, you know, odds are odds. And ultimately, you can't beat the odds. You can do it short term. You can do it, you know, once in a while, you'll have a big lucky strike. But over the course of time, the odds will always win. That's why with global warming, you know, yes, we can have a cold winter. We can even have a serious cold snap. It could stay 20 below for the next week, but that doesn't reverse the overall trend. If you look at all the data from all over the planet, everything from the global ice caps to the temperature readings that we've been taking for over 100 years now, it's clear the globe is warming. The things are getting hotter, and much as I love winter, and I do love winter, the fact that we got a little snow today doesn't reverse the fact that global warming is real and it's happening, and it's something we need to do something about. And it's something we will do something about. As you'll hear later on in the show, I have another letter from the future. Yes, my great-great-granddaughter, Marie I., is nice enough to be sending letters back in time to me. And they appear next to my bed in the morning before I do the show. And I'm happy I'm going to be able to read that to you later on in the show. Also later on in the show, we're going to have a call, hopefully, from Japan. There's a very nice woman there named Mariko who is going to talk to us a little bit about what's happened to the people in Japan as a result of Fukushima, the sufferings that people are doing there, the fact that so many people had to abandon everything they owned, their families, their land, their pets, because of the nuclear power plant meltdown there. And so that's kind of the theme to today's show is meltdowns. And the reason I want to talk to you about that today is it's a good day to hear some some scary stories. Hopefully you're home, you're warm, you're bundled up in a blanket. Maybe you've got a cup of coffee or a cup of cocoa in front of you. It's a good day to hear some scary stories, and there's two very scary stories that I'm going to tell you that everyone in this region, frankly, should know. These are stories not many people know, but it's vital to what's going on in your life and in your pocketbook today, and so you should know these stories. One of them, the first one, is the story of Fermi 1 nuclear power plant, and the second is the story of Davis-Besse, the hole in the head, the reactor with a hole in the head. So we're going to get to those in a minute, but first I want to tell you a little bit about the show. This is a call-in show, and so starting around 8:15, we're going to take your calls, and you can call on literally any environmental subject that you want. I love questions from the audience. I love the direction that callers take us, and so, even if you're not calling about specifically nuclear power plants today, anything, if you've heard something in the news, if you've seen something, if you always had a question about, what is an algae bloom or whatever your question might be, I'd be happy to answer them for you, because for a green future, we all have to have a basic understanding of ecology and environment. Without that ability to, understand what's happening to the ecology, to the environment, we're kind of at the mercy of corporations that are going to come in and tell us, oh, this is true and that's true. And I'm sorry if I'm the first one to tell you this, but the corporate information that you get isn't always true. Sometimes corporations will tell you something that's not really true because that helps their profits. So that's why we have shows like this one, to provide a balance, to provide some better information. So the number to call in is 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. This is the best radio program in the Toledo area, but it gets better every time you call. So I'll repeat that when we get closer to that point. But right now, it's time for a scary story. Bundle up, get close to your loved ones here, because I'm going to tell you the story of the Fermi 1 nuclear power plant. Now, some of you might be familiar with Fermi 2. That's the nuclear power plant that's operating in Michigan, just north of us. And Fermi 2, you also may have wondered why it's called Fermi 2. What happened with Fermi 1? Well, I'll tell you. Fermi 1 was a nuclear reactor on the same site as Fermi 2, and it was what is called a breeder reactor. That is a reactor. The wonderful miracle of the nuclear age was supposed to be the fact that nuclear power plants, as they operate, can generate more of their own fuel. That is, that when you take your uranium fuel rods and you start the nuclear reaction going and you start bombarding them with neutrons, then what you create in those rods is more uranium and also elements like plutonium, which can also be used in nuclear reactors. Well, the problem is that when you're doing this, you're operating at extremely high temperatures and pressures, and you're getting perilously close to creating just a plain old atomic bomb inside your nuclear reactor. So breeder reactors never really took off. They attempted a couple of them. They were all complete failures, and one of the most complete failures was the Fermi 1 nuclear plant. So they built this breeder reactor up there in Michigan, and the thing about breeder reactors is they operate at so much higher temperatures than regular reactors is that you can't use water to cool them. So what did they use? They used liquid sodium. And liquid sodium is this incredibly dense stuff. It's very hot. And one interesting feature of liquid sodium, if you remember your chemistry classes from high school, is that if it's exposed to air, it explodes chemically. But it makes a great temperature conductor, so they had this reactor with a nuclear core, very high levels of plutonium and uranium, and it was being cooled by liquid sodium that circulated around. Well, in the building of Fermi 1, somebody looked at the basic design of nuclear reactors, and they saw the inside of the chamber was this, it was shaped like a bowl. It's kind of cylindrical with a rounded top and a rounded bottom. And they said to themselves, oh, if a meltdown ever starts, all the melted fuel is going to concentrate down in the bottom of this bowl. And since we're using a breeder reactor with so much uranium and plutonium in it, if that melted fuel kind of pools together there, it's going to actually go critical and explode. It'll make an atomic bomb. You'll have Hiroshima, Nagasaki right there inside your reactor building. And so they had the brilliant idea, we'll build a little structure under there. We'll make a little cone out of zirconium so that if any molten fuel drips down on it, it'll get spread out instead of concentrated. And so they stuck this in the reactor, and they had these big zirconium plates of metal, and they bolted them into place. Well, one thing they forgot is that liquid sodium is so much more dense than water, and so you need a much stronger bolt than you would need in a regular nuclear reactor. In fact, you need a bolt so strong, I don't even think they had this at that time, because this was all happening in 1966. So it's an old story, but it's one worth remembering. So they started the nuclear reactor up, and lo and behold, all of a sudden temperature started spiking, and they're like, what's going on? So they turned it off. They shifted some fuel rods around, and they're like, oh, this can't be that serious. We have engineered this thing so beautifully that there can't really be anything serious wrong. We must be having a temperature reading wrong. The thermocouples must be malfunctioning. So they started it up again, and lo and behold, the temperature started to spike. The pressure started to build. Alarms started going off. Radiation alarms started going off all over the plant. And they're like, okay, well, if every radiation alarm is going off, something must be wrong. So they shut the plant down. And in the subsequent investigation, they discovered that one of those little zirconium plates they had stuck on the bottom had sheared off. Actually, two of them had sheared off, and one of them floated around. So if you could imagine the situation. You've got this plate of zirconium metal floating around in this pool of this churning sea of liquid sodium, and it flops up into the intake valve for the sodium that's supposed to circulate around the fuel rods and blocks it completely. And so the fuel rods at that inlet that were supposed to get cooled by liquid sodium don't get cooled, and in fact they have a partial meltdown. So it kind of boggles my mind the level of engineering needed to get us that close to disaster. And if they had continued to run the reactor a little longer, what would have happened is all the fuel rods would have melted down, and the building would have exploded, and we would have lost Toledo and Detroit. In fact, there's a very famous book about this accident. It's called We Almost Lost Detroit. And so so we came literally within a few hours of losing both Toledo and Detroit, and having Lake Erie be a radioactively contaminated sewer, basically with fish too radioactive to eat and beaches too radioactive to swim on. We almost killed Lake Erie. We almost lost Detroit. We almost lost Toledo. And Cleveland wouldn't have been any too good either, because the water circulates around the lake. So that was the first close call for us, Fermi 1. And you might think that we would have learned our lesson, that nuclear power is too dirty and too dangerous. In fact, it's kind of interesting. It's so dangerous that the cleanup of the new Fermi 1 reactor is just recently, quote-unquote, completed. It'll never really be fully cleaned up because the radioactive waste that we created in that accident continues to exist. But in 2008, they actually had a sodium fire. They opened a little pipe, and there was a little bit of leftover sodium from the 60s, and it burst into flame and sent some radioactive smoke out into the atmosphere. It's just a reminder that these things never really go away. So the story happened a while ago, but the effects and the radioactive waste are here with us today. So you'd think we'd have learned our lesson, but we didn't. We kept operating our nuclear plants. And then in 2002, here at our very own Davis-Besse nuclear power plant, we had the second near miss for Toledo. Nukes have been, so this is nuclear power industry's second attempt to wipe Toledo off the map. And what happened there, it's called the hole in the head accident. And the way nuclear power plants work is that they have an inner chamber which is filled with boric acid. And the boric acid is circulating around, keeping the fuel rods cool and carrying the heat from the fuel rods where the reaction is taking place out to turbines and generators. Now, the reactor core is under immense pressure, 40 atmospheres of pressure. And, if you'll remember, we have that 1 atmosphere is 14 pounds per square inch. So multiply that by 40, and that's how much pressure is inside a nuclear plant. And the reactor rate is controlled by these fuel rods, and these moderator rods that you put into the reactor core to absorb neutrons, and that stops the reaction, or you pull these control rods out of the nuclear core, and that increases the reaction. So these control rods go in and out of the core through these nozzles. And so periodically what happens is they have to maintenance these nozzles. But what happened to Davis-Besse is one of the nozzles cracked, and boric acid started leaking out of from the reactor core onto the reactor head. And the acid ate through the cold steel. There was a cold steel on the outside of the reactor shell. Ate all the way through that. Then it ate through the 16 inches of concrete underneath that, and that's the strength of the shell that's supposed to protect us from meltdowns and explosions. It ate all the way through that, and it ate all the way down at the very inner layer of a reactor core is a thin 3/8 of an inch thick piece of stainless steel. It coats the inside, and it had eaten all the way down to the stainless steel. And that stainless steel, under 40 pounds of pressure, it started to bulge and was just beginning to crack. So while this was going on, unbeknownst to the people running Davis-Besse, they were arguing with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission because they wanted to keep the plant running. They didn't want to have to stop for maintenance. They didn't want to have to stop for inspection, because every time you do that, you lose money. And so finally the NRC said, look, shut down the plant, do an inspection. You're way overdue. And they said, oh, all right. So while they were doing the inspection, now this is a story that I heard, and I haven't been able to confirm this, but at the time I heard that what happened was they removed one of the nozzles for servicing, and they dropped it, and it disappeared. And they're like, where'd the nozzle go? It wasn't on the floor of the building. It wasn't on the scaffolding. And that's when they discovered it had fallen into this hole. This hole had grown. It was about the size and shape of a football, and it went all the way down through the cement, all the way to the stainless steel inner shell, and that's how they discovered it. Now, had they run that reactor a little longer, and the estimates are a few more days to a few more months, but had they run it a little longer and that stainless steel had ruptured, what would have happened is a jet of unbelievably radioactive boric acid would have shot out through the reactor head and hit the containment dome, the structure on the outside. And that containment dome, as we now know, at Davis-Besse is cracked. It was built incorrectly, and there were cracks from the beginning. Water has gotten into those cracks and frozen and unfrozen and widened them. There's also voids. There's places where the cement and the outer shell simply didn't form right, and there's big holes and cavities inside it. And so that reactor shell had this super hot, super chemically reactive, radioactive jet of boric acid had hit it, it most likely would have failed. And with a hole in the top of the reactor, you cannot anymore control the nuclear reaction, because no matter how fast you pump coolant in, it's going to just blast right out through that hole. And so we came literally within less than 3/8 of an inch of disaster at Davis-Besse, of losing Lake Erie, losing Toledo, losing Sandusky. We all would have had to abandon this area the same way that they've had to abandon Fukushima. And that's why I was hoping, we have someone from Japan named Mariko, who I was hoping could call in, but it looks like we might be having some technical difficulties at her end. Basically to talk a little bit about the suffering that the people of Fukushima, or I guess the correct Japanese pronunciation is Fukushima, the suffering that they've had. They've had to leave their homes. Some of them have lost everything. They've had to live with the knowledge that their land is radioactively contaminated, that some of those areas literally will never be safe again in the human timescale. Now, the government of Japan is saying, "Oh, we can clean it up. We can clean it up," and they've created mountains and mountains of black plastic bags that are filled with topsoil, dirt, dust. Literally, they've tried to scrape Japan clean, the areas that were contaminated, but what they find is that they can't do it, that no matter how much they clean and how much they scrape and how much they stick in these bags, there's more. So that is the fate which almost awaited us. And one reason that I'm bringing this up now is because both Davis-Besse and our other Ohio nuclear plant, Perry, are scheduled for closing. Now, if you're someone who understands the danger of nuclear power, you might be thinking, "Oh, that's great, problem solved. They're going to close them. We're okay." Well, the thing is that what the nuclear industry has been doing all over the country, excuse me, is using the threat of closure of a nuclear plant to blackmail the politicians in those states and to get state money and huge rate increases to keep the plants running. They say, it's a question of jobs, it's a question of the economy. We can't let these plants close down. Well, that's not true, just like most of the things the nuclear industry says. We have plenty of power in terms of wind and solar and natural gas. We could literally shut the plants down tomorrow and there wouldn't be any damage to our energy systems. And the truth of that is that they had to do it. When they found this problem with Davis-Besse, that plant was offline for almost 2 years, and the economy of Ohio did not collapse. None of these terrible things happened. Plus, the jobs, there's about 300 people who work at Davis-Besse. You have to compare that to the 3,000 people that work at First Solar, because these two industries are actually competing for our money, for our investment for the future. And solar employs a lot more people at very good wages, and it takes people both to install and maintain solar panels all over the place, as well as manufacture them. Whereas nuclear power, you've got your little cadre of nuclear engineers, very small group of people, very few jobs, and they're very concentrated in the one spot. The benefits don't really go out to the whole state, especially if the true cost of running these nuke plants is factored into the electric bill. And this is where it's going to hit you personally, because Toledo Edison, or First Energy, has asked for literally an unlimited rate increases in order to keep Davis-Besse running. Davis-Besse has all kinds of problems. It's a very old plant, and problems like with the containment shell, those are going to cost tens of billions. It's going to cost tens of billions to replace the containment shell, and First Energy literally can't afford it. In fact, Westinghouse, the big nuclear power company in the United States, can't afford it. Nuclear is literally the most expensive way to boil water to generate power. And so what they want, what they've asked the state for, the Public Utilities Commission, is permission to increase our electric bills as much as they need. And if you give a corporation like First Energy a blank check, they're literally just going to keep adding zeros onto the end of that check that they're writing to themselves for as long as they can. So if you want your electric bill to quadruple or quintuple, just let First Energy have what it wants. Just let the government, let the Public Utilities Commission and the governor, the new governor, give them unlimited access to rate increases. But if you don't want that, then you need to complain. You need to say to the Public Utilities Commission, don't give First Energy rate increases to support their nuke plants. And we all need to say that, or we're all going to get hurt in the pocketbook, as well as the environmental cost of generating tons and tons and tons more nuclear waste. You're all familiar, probably, with the Fukushima disaster. Well, potentially there's an even greater disaster at Davis-Besse right now, and that is the used fuel rods are sitting there in a cooling pond getting water run over them. If that water should ever fail for any reason, those used rods will start reacting just like a regular rod, and they're just in an unsecured building with no shell or a containment structure around them. They will melt, and they will have a nuclear meltdown worse than the meltdown in a nuclear plant, because there's tons and tons more rods. There's 30 years of spent fuel sitting in those pools. And every day that the plant runs makes the risk worse. So as I said, scary stories, but an important one to hear on a cold winter day. So now we're going to open the phone lines up, and like I said, we're going to open it up for any kind of environmental issue that you want to talk about. 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. So give us a call. I'm going to take this opportunity to go ahead and thank our sponsor. We are being sponsored by DeMar Computer Consulting. DeMar Computer Consulting is a company that will help you personally with your computer problems. It's like having your own IT department. DeMar Consulting will come out to your house. They'll install software for you. They'll train you on new software that you've gotten for yourself. They'll do backups of your computer, data transfers. They'll diagnose hardware problems or software problems. And you do not need to bring a computer in. You don't need to disconnect it and carry it into the store. DeMar Computer Consulting will come to you. They're on the web at demarconsulting.com, and you can reach them at 419-973-3000. That's 419-973-3000. So if you've got that new software someone gave you for Christmas and you haven't installed it yet, call DeMar Computer Consulting. If you got a new computer or new laptop, then and you haven't installed it yet, call Computer Consulting, and they'll transfer your data for you. And so we're very happy to have them as a sponsor, and please give them a call at 419-973-3000. All right. Well, and speaking of calls, we have a caller. Nate is on line one. So, Nate, go ahead. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, and welcome to For a Green Future.
It's good to be on. I just wanted to touch base. You were speaking about Davis-Besse and the amount of jobs that are out there and everything else, and compared to First Solar Energy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit of a gray area there on the amount. I know you want to talk about environmental issues, but
Oh, yeah.
there is a bit of a gray area there. I mean, you were saying that they only employ about 300 people. I mean, as FENOC itself, are you saying that there's only 300 FENOC employees? Because as a tradesman, I've been out to Besse during outages. They do every 2 years. They have outages, and that brings anywhere from 1,000 to almost 2,000 extra jobs out to these areas. I mean, you're bringing in electricians, you're bringing in laborers, operators, and there's also multiple companies that are nested within Besse right now. And it's just like you go over into Oregon, right on Woodville Road and Pickle Road, to Toledo Refining Company. I mean, you have Toledo Refining Company itself.
You make a very good point, and let me talk a little bit about that. So when I say 300 jobs, I'm talking about people in the parking lot for the day-to-day operation. But the reason that every couple of years they have to employ thousands of people is because of the radioactive nature of the plant. A lot of people don't know that as a nuclear plant operates, it shoots out neutrons in all directions, and
which is why they give you your badge when you walk in,
right?
How much radiation you've received for the amount of time you've been there.
Right, exactly. And those neutrons hit everything in their path. They hit the structures, they hit the walls, the clocks, and they hit the people going in, like yourself. And so what happens is that everything that gets hit by neutrons can become radioactive. It's called secondary radiation. And so what's happening is these thousands of workers are going in and getting irradiated as they run in, turn a bolt, replace a valve, and run back out again. And so they're absorbing sometimes a year's worth of radiation in a few
within about 5-10 minutes. Yes, yeah. I'm well aware of that because I have been that guy. I had to go in. I did 13 minutes of work, and I got paid for 12 hours each day for 8 weeks. They paid me. That's my wage because I was exposed to so much. I understand my risks and long-term effects, which I do understand that. And
well, you understand that for yourself, and
I understand it's not good for the environment at all.
Yeah, not for the environment.
Water that they run in their towers,
it's quite possibly you could have hurt your future generations. You could have hurt your descendants too.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've seen when their cooling towers begin to run low on water, they begin to pump water directly out of Lake Erie to fill that cooling tower. I mean, you're not going to be able to completely contain everything that. So
let me ask you.
Pump that water in. You're not going to be able to contain that water. There's going to be some seepage. There's going to be between evaporation and everything. There's going to be particles and everything going into the air and back into the water supply, going back into groundwater, going into everything, which I understand.
Yeah, and that's why studies show that around a nuclear plant like Davis-Besse, a lot of cancer rates double. Specifically, childhood leukemia doubles. And that's one of the main reasons that, like, the Germans and the European Union are moving away from nuclear power. But and one of those seepages that you're talking about is radioactive tritium, which for decades Davis-Besse denied. Saying no radioactive tritium is escaping our property, but now finally, oh yes, we do have a tritium. We have tritium leaks. And so this is a pattern that they'll come along and deny things for decades, and then finally, when they're like, okay, you've been right for decades. Yes, we are leaking radioactive water into Lake Erie, but wouldn't you rather have been working on wind turbines or solar panels? I mean, did it matter to you to get the good wages whether or not you would be working on a nuke plant or working on a clean energy source? Oh, we don't have you on the line anymore. But thank you so much for the call. That was a wonderful call, and And yes, for brief periods of time, nuclear power plants do employ thousands and thousands of people, but those people are being damaged by the radiation that they're working in. Now, radiation is a very fickle creature. It's a very fickle beast. You could literally expose two people to the same amount of radiation at certain levels, and one of them will die immediately, and the other one won't, because there's a very random element to radiation. Because the radioactive atoms that are created in nuclear power plants can get into people's bodies, and then they have to irradiate just the right cell in just the right way to cause a cancer. Sometimes, especially with higher half-lives, a radioactive atom will get taken in, and it won't even explode. It won't even turn radioactive while it's in someone's body. It'll pass right through them with no harm at all. But the next person or the next creature, the next plant down the line that absorbs it could get cancer from it. The nuclear industry likes to hide behind the fact that you can't take a specific cancer from a specific person and say that one was caused by Davis-Besse. But what you can do, and what they don't talk about, is that if you've doubled the cancer rate in an area, you can say half those cancers were caused by the radioactive exposure. You just can't say specifically which ones. And so the nuclear power industry is hidden behind that. You can't say we caused that one for its entire operating period. So once again, yes, I do admit that for brief periods of time, you do get lots of jobs at a nuclear plant, especially when there's a catastrophe or near catastrophe. I mean, when they had to replace the head and they were shut down for 2 years, they employed thousands of people to put a new head on. And kind of a funny story, the first replacement head was exactly the same design as the one that had failed. And guess what? It started leaking boric acid right away. And so Davis-Besse actually has a third head on it. It's unprecedented in the nuclear industry that they've had to replace the reactor head twice. And every time you replace a reactor head, you have to cut through the containment dome, the concrete structure on the outside, and that weakens it. And so we have a patched together, crumbling nuclear plant on our eastern border, and First Energy wants unlimited amounts of funds to keep it running. I say, let's take those millions. I would rather take the millions and millions that we're giving to First Energy and just give it directly to people like our last caller. Just give them the money and shut down the nuclear plant. You know, it ends up being cheaper in the long run because we still have to deal with this nuclear waste. And people like Bill Gates that are now promoting nuclear power, people who just look at the short-term numbers, don't understand the true long-term economic damage that nuclear power does by making people sick, by making the world less habitable. You end up hurting the economy. You end up, in the end, with fewer jobs and less money than if you picked an energy source which doesn't damage the environment. And, you know, like I said, I'm sure our last caller, who made a good short-term living at the risk of his health and at working on Davis-Besse, would just as likely gone along and done the same sort of work on energy sources that don't pollute the environment, that don't put us at risk of having to abandon our homes, abandon everything we've got because of a meltdown. And one note on the abandoning of the homes, one of the ways that the nuclear power industry is subsidized by the government is that they're held harmless in the case of a nuclear power plant meltdown. They have a very limited liability. So no matter how many billions of dollars worth of damage they do, if they have an accident, they're only liable for a couple $100 million. And then the government says, oh, we'll pick up the rest. And the reason for that is no insurance company on Earth is willing to insure nuclear power because they know, they've done the numbers, they're in the business of assessing risk. They know it's too risky And so without that government subsidy, every nuclear power plant would shut down tomorrow because the people running them also understand the risks. And so there we go. That's the case. That's the situation with our nuclear power plants. But on the bright side, we are seeing more and more solar installations. We're seeing more and more wind. Those sources of energy are growing much faster than nuclear around the world. And in fact, nuclear around the world is going through kind of an implosion right now. There are uranium mines that are shutting down. It used to be, back in the glory days of nuclear power, that plutonium was looked at as the most valuable resource in the world because it goes so well into nuclear power plants. Well, now nobody wants plutonium. There's a plant in Britain that's sitting on 200 tons of plutonium. And the reason it's called plutonium, this is also an interesting story, is that when they were trying to figure out, we've made this new element. This is a human-made element. There's no plutonium existing naturally on Earth. Let's see how it affects human or living organisms. And so they would expose test animals. This was the day before PETA. So they'd expose like monkeys and gorillas and dogs to plutonium. And they found that no matter how small the dose, it killed all the test subjects. That's why they call it plutonium, after the god of death, the god of the underworld, Pluto. And so they kept killing all the test subjects. So they kept having to design new ways to make smaller and smaller amounts of a substance, and they got down to microscopic amounts of plutonium, and it still killed all the test subjects. So we know that plutonium is deadly in the parts per billion levels. And so if you have 200 tons of it, the way they have in England sitting there, you don't have a gold mine. You don't have something valuable. You have a horrible liability that could go wrong at any time. So, but as I said, the world has turned the corner. Nuclear power is fading quickly, and wind and solar. As I said last week, if you look at Germany, they're shutting all their nuclear plants and at the same time building wind and solar, and they're shutting their coal plants too. And they've been at it for several years, and so finally Germany last year, 2018, generated more power with their wind and their solar and their hydro than they did with coal. And so you can both get rid of the coal plants and shut down the nukes and still have a thriving economy, which is what we need to do in the future. And speaking of the future, it's time for one of my little favorite sections of the show, the letter from the future. And as I said, this is a kind of an interesting situation. I'm getting letters from my great-great-granddaughter. They're just appearing on my bedstand, and so they're pretty nice. This is one to be read on January 13th, 2019. That's today. So here it goes. Dear great-great-grandpa, hello from the year 2299. From your great-great-granddaughter, Marie I. I opened your last letter from 2019. Thank you for writing. So you went all the way until the middle of January without any snow in 2019? That's hard to imagine. In our time, after more than 250 years without putting more CO2 into the atmosphere, we have winters that are almost normal according to the historical averages. I'm working in the far north on the Kola Peninsula in Russia. We've had snow ever since I arrived last week. Yesterday, our train had to stop and wait for a herd of caribou to go by. Some of us actually got out of the train to watch. The caribou herds almost went extinct in your time. Like so many other species, climate change and radioactive fallout from the nuclear meltdowns and from nuclear weapons tests that you did back then nearly wiped them out. But they're coming back now. All my friends really liked the video of them that I sent. I read in your letter about what it was like to have to own a car. I still find the idea very weird. So you had these huge metal boxes with rubber wheels that you would use to go places, and most of the time they just sat there in your driveways and parking lots. When I learned about cars in history class, so much of your economy and culture was built up around cars that I imagined they were in constant use, that you were always in a car going someplace. But you're telling me that you had all those huge factories and you shipped all that oil for fuel all over the planet for machines that most of the time just sat there doing nothing. I find that weird and fascinating. In the future, for short trips, we always bicycle or walk. For long trips, we use the train, and for in-between, we have buses, canal boats, or zeppelins. Most of the time, we don't need to travel. If we want to meet someone, we all get together in a video meeting room. I'm on my way right now to meet with my nephew who's living on Mars. I'll tell you how he's doing in my next letter. Bye for now, great-great-grandpa, and don't worry, things will get better. Love, Marie I. So, that's nice. I always get a little kick out of these letters from my great-great-granddaughter. So, 866-240-1065, 866-240-1065. And I really appreciate Nate's call. That was an excellent call. And he's in the position so many of us are in that, in order to get the money that we need to survive, we have to take jobs and do things that actually aren't necessarily good for the environment long term. It's a very hard situation, and I have noticed that there's a tendency for the amount of pay you get to be inversely proportional to the amount of damage that you're doing to the environment. In other words, the worse something is environmentally, the better it pays. So people on those oil rigs are making tons of money. People who have to work at nuclear power plants are making really good wages. But it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, we could pay just as well for jobs that help the environment and things that help the people and the economy. But there's this, somehow if you toss more and more money at something, it seems like people are more willing to do it, even if in the back of their minds they know this is not really a good idea for the earth or for people. So think about that the next time you're looking at taking a job or thinking about a career move. Think about the long-term implications of what you would be doing. Yes, short-term we all need to pay our bills, but we need to think about the green future. We need to, have decisions that bring us closer to the green future that we all want, and further away from so many disasters that are threatening us environmentally. And I don't like to dwell on those disasters any longer than I have to in order for us to understand the danger and to turn the other way. That's really the big question of our time, is that do we have enough wisdom as a society to turn the other way and to not crash all our systems? So many cultures, if you look at anthropology and you look at so many cultures in the world, there have been thousands of civilizations, and a lot of them, almost all of them, follow the pattern of growth, expansion, depletion of resources, and collapse. We don't have to follow that pattern. We have enough scientific knowledge, we have enough understanding of the basic processes of the earth that we can avoid that fate, but only if we make the right decisions. You can understand alcoholism, you can understand how it damages your liver, you can understand the health effects and how it can kill you, but if you don't stop drinking, all that knowledge won't save you. We're kind of in that same situation right now. We understand global warming, we understand resource depletion and population depletion, but if those if that understanding isn't translated into actual policies, it does us no good. So that's why here on the For a Green Future, I like to focus on things and people that are taking us in the right direction, that are giving us some hope. And so, we have a few minutes left here. We could take a few more calls. So what kind of things are you doing in your life to give the rest of us hope? What kind of environmentally aware things do you do? 866-240-1065, 866-240-1065. One thing that's happening in Bowling Green, which has happened in other cities around the country, is they're looking at banning plastic bag use. Now, plastic bags are made from oil, and they're kind of a unique pollutant in that you could lose your plastic bag in your driveway in Bowling Green, and the winds will take it, and it could literally end up, it could fall into a river, get carried downstream, and it could literally end up in the ocean. Plastic bags can be carried hundreds of miles in the wind, especially if they get sucked up into weather patterns or something. So, in Bowling Green, right now, they're looking at the idea of banning them. And other cities have done it. Chicago's done it. Boston has done it. And guess what? Their economies did not collapse. There were no horrible side effects of doing something environmentally correct. There's so many scary stories that get told whenever something environmentally balanced is presented, whenever an actual change in our behavior is presented. And they're never true. The horrible side effects that get predicted never happen. So, and instead benefits show up, and benefits that were never even expected show up. And I had a fun experience, and changing to an environmentally sound future doesn't have to be this scary thing that's going to cause us to have, privation, that we're going to, we're going to have to be cold all the time and hungry. No, quite the opposite. In fact, just this past week, I had the pleasure for the first time of driving a Prius, and it was great. It handled terrific. It was very smooth. It was incredibly quiet because the engine wasn't running a lot of the time that I was using it. And it was just yes, I was driving, but I was getting more than 50 miles to the gallon. I was getting 56 miles to the gallon. And there was no change in my lifestyle. There was no, hardship involved. The heater worked great. The radio was fantastic. It was just like a drive in a car that only gets 12 miles to the gallon, but it used a lot less fuel. And it put less pollution in the air. I measurably put less carbon in the air driving the Prius than I did driving the car I normally drive. So if we start down those paths, we will find ways to go further down those paths. There's a balanced and an imbalanced way to do everything. You could do things in a way that help the environment, that help the people around you, that help society, or you could do things in a way that hurt the people and the environment and the society. And just keeping the environment in mind when you're making your decisions on things like what kind of house are you going to build, where are you going to live, what kind of car are you going to drive. These things can have a big impact and not really cost you anything in terms of comfort. So being an environmentalist actually is kind of easy, and it's pleasurable. And if we all did it, we would all be in a better situation. So 866-240-1065, 866-240-1065. We got time for one more call. So please call in. And don't worry, sports are on the way soon. I wanted to ask my technician here, who's next up here on this channel here on 106.5?
It is Mick Gonzalez with the Cheap Seats.
Yeah. So he's on his way. Don't worry. And so the sports will be back very shortly. So I am Joe DeMar, and I wanted to say that I am speaking only for myself in this show. I don't speak for the station. I'm also the political director of the Ohio Green Party, and I'm not speaking for the Ohio Green Party here. Again, I'm speaking just for myself. But the Ohio Green Party is an example of, what just happened to us in the 2018 election. We were banned by the state of Ohio, and the reason is that the legislature passed this law saying that if you want to stay a political party in Ohio, you have to get at least 3% of the gubernatorial vote. Well, we weren't able to do that because we didn't have the tens of millions of dollars, the obscene amounts of money that the Republican and Democrat candidates did. We were operating a grassroots campaign, door to door, going to public events, speaking at, filling out questionnaires from citizens groups. And so we did get a lot of votes. We got 50,000 votes. We got votes from every county in the state of Ohio. But the legislature passed this arbitrary law saying, you have to get at least 3% or you're banned. So we've been banned. But think about what would have happened if the Republican legislature hadn't done that. What if they actually made it easy for other parties to get started and to grow in the state of Ohio? What if they were approaching politics in a balanced manner instead of just looking at the benefits to their own parties? Wouldn't our whole democracy be healthier? Wouldn't having more choices for the voters be better? And so environmental things are like that too. If you can make the right decision, if you can make the decision that benefits the most people and doesn't, cut out people or the environment, things actually get better. And things are getting better in places like Europe, where they're rapidly moving away from fossil fuels and moving away from nuclear power. And that's the thing. Whenever people come up to me, and say, oh, we can't do it, wind's not ready, solar's not ready, the problem with that position is it's happening everywhere else in the planet. That's why all the other countries of the world were willing to sign the climate treaty in Paris. And the U.S. signed it too, because we can do it. We have the engineering capability. We have the people that are willing to work hard and do what's necessary to help the future generations and their children and their children's children. But the leadership, the political leadership, and the economic leadership in the country are taking us in the wrong direction. And so when you hear a billionaire like Bill Gates say, oh, nuclear power is the answer, remember, he got to be a billionaire by doing what was best for him. And he actually has personally invested a lot of money in nuclear power. So it's not too surprising that he's going to be saying, hey, we should all go nuclear, because, it benefits him personally. Think about what would benefit you. Think about what would benefit your family. Would having 2 nuclear power plants that are on the verge of exploding, is that a benefit to you, or does that hurt your family? And one quick thing about Fermi is they're talking about building a Fermi 3 nuclear power plant right on the spot where Fermi 1 melted down. So we need to stop that too. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for calling in, and I'll be back next week with more For a Green Future.